Welcome to the second ever edition of 110 Daily. I'm Josh Doring. He's Chris Brown. And Chris, what we saw last night reinforces one of my firm theories when it comes to sports and analyzing sports, which is in almost every situation, the answer is not black and white, it is gray. That is the case with what is going on with the Philadelphia Eagles at this moment in time. But before I go on a whole spiel, I want to get your thoughts. What did you see last night? What did you make of the offensive debacle that was the first half and, in general, most of that game?
I'm interested. I'm really curious to see what your take is. I know we talked about this a little bit before we went on the air because, like you said, I'm in complete agreement that this is more complicated than just let's point the finger at Carson Wentz and make him be the scapegoat for everything. Now, I'm completely with you in that I'm completely, that doesn't mean we can ignore what happened with Carson Wentz and some of his struggles. One thing I was looking for going into last night's game, and I can't say that I've been, following the Eagles a lot all season and watching a lot of their games. So I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to see. But I was looking to see some sort of positive signs from Carson Wentz. That was one thing I was looking for. There are other things too, but that was one thing. Even if it wasn't a great performance, I wanted to see something that gave me optimism that he could get back to being that guy that was getting everybody excited just a few years ago. But I feel like sort of what summed up the night in some ways was Steve Levy's call on Wentz's fourth quarter interception in the end zone when he basically he used the tone. He said, and there's the interception, as if that's what everyone was waiting for. The other shoe to drop, something to go wrong on that drive, because it was just like, it kind of sums it up. I mean, I know it was just in that one play, but it was sort of like, yeah, there's the interception. I set the bar low for Wentz in my head, and he still didn't get there at all, anywhere close. And it's really bad. I mean, it's most interceptions in the NFL, most sacks in the NFL, most off target incompletions in the NFL bad. But of course, I know you're going to have, this is a lot of what you're going to have to say here. It's a lot more than just him. It's Wentz being by far the team's leading rusher and Miles Sanders rushing for 15 yards. It's an offensive line that gave up 6 sacks. It's bad drops from receivers, a lack of offensive creativity, terrible game management. It's a team that has a disconnect between the front office and a coaching staff. It's a team that does not have a plan right now, in my opinion. And that has been the case all season. And that is honestly my biggest takeaway from this game is this is a team that is running without a plan. What was the plan for Jalen Hurts in playing 2 bizarre snaps? I don't know. And there's lots of arguments for whether or not Jalen Hurts should have been in there more, whether he should be in there now. But no matter what, there needs to be some plan and stick to it rather than whatever happened with Jalen Hurts last night. Now, I understand with Wentz, I understand the argument that replacing him with Hurts might not do much. I understand that there's a lot. It's like I said, it's a lot more complicated than that. And we can get into this here in a minute. I do think, though, that there should be a switch made at the position. I'm curious to see what you think about that. But again, it's much more complicated. It's a team that needs to come up with a plan, in my opinion.
Yeah, and look, week three, I was not willing to have a discussion about Carson Wentz being a bad quarterback or Carson Wentz not playing well. Wasn't willing
Right.
to accept that that was a possibility. It was two bad games. I was not going to dignify that discussion.
Sure.
Even before this game, we're to the point where I can't do that anymore. He is not playing well at all. Completely acknowledge that. He missed throws last night. There was the interception that looks, I would argue, worse than it actually was because it was just a miscommunication. But there's also a real argument that's not where he should have thrown the football. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I get it. He is not helping this team right now. But to sit here and say he's the problem is just incredibly naive. When you look at
Right.
let's start with the interception. It's 4th and 4. You're down 11. Kick a field goal.
You need 2 scores anyway.
Right. If you don't have faith in your offense, that means you need to put points on the board so that you only
Right.
have to have one more drive that works. And guess what? They scored another touchdown. Now, it was weird at the end and it was a different context. I get it. But they did score. They did score. And then you go to the other variety of things. Most of those sacks were coverage sacks. And not because the Seahawks were playing terrific coverage as much as that offensive line just couldn't hold up to give him any chance. He was not holding the football too long, by and large. He just didn't have anywhere to go with it. And when you look at the receivers, this was on track to be the worst pass defense in the history of the NFL. And they could not get open. Could not get open. And then the 3 times they did, he underthrew Goddard a couple times. He missed a couple shots to Alshon Jeffrey. Carson Wentz isn't helping anything right now. I completely acknowledge that. But what you're asking him to be is perfect. Like he was last year when he carried this team with all of those injuries, when he didn't have receivers by the end of the season. And he's just not that player right now. And so you're in a situation where his offensive line isn't helping him. They don't have last night they didn't have a running game. His receivers aren't doing anything. The defense was good, but it's also worth pointing out, had they not gotten those 2 fourth-down stops in the first quarter, that could have been an easy extra 10, 14 points for the Seahawks. They drove right down the field on their first possession, and Derek Barnett made a couple really nice plays and kept him in the game for a while.
Right.
And then, you've got the bad coaching decisions, why you go for it on 4th down. You've got the bad performances by every other player on offense. And on top of all of that, what is Jim Schwartz doing telling DK Metcalf he's not Megatron?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, how can you be, what makes you think that that's a good thing to do, that's
right.
going to help anything? How do you feel like that's the kind of position that you're in that's going to help, that is going to help make that appropriate? Like,
and especially with that guy in particular.
Right.
He's incredibly driven and he's just a freak in a good way. You don't want to give him any kind of extra motivation. And so
he said that's exactly what it was. It's just motivate, right? And he's the kind of guy that can just turn that into production very quickly if he's just energized like that.
Right. So he had the best game of his career and made Darius Slade look bad on multiple occasions. So that's where I come down on this, is that it is not black and white. It is not that Carson Wentz is the problem. It's that Carson Wentz is a problem, but the larger issue is that he has no help. I will continue to believe that there were 3, 4, 5 quarterbacks in the NFL that could have done what he did last season and dragged that team to the playoffs. He is not the quarterback that can do that right now. Again, he missed throws, but I don't know. It's not like you could plug somebody else in there and it fixes the problem. And the other thing on Jalen Hurts, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 plays he had, and the one that was the read option on 3rd down that he handed the ball off and they didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Go watch Dan Orlovsky break down that play. They could have had a touchdown if he read that correctly. That should have been a bubble screen. It was an RPO and he decided to keep it on the ground. He should have thrown it because everybody was biting down on the handoff. It's not, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this. That's where I'm coming down on this quarterback discussion. He has shown me nothing to believe that he is actually better than Carson Wentz. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, I completely agree with your assessment that, there's only a very, very small number of quarterbacks that could really achieve significantly better results given what the weapons that Carson Wentz has right now, and or the lack of them and the lack of production around him. There's nobody that the Eagles could bring in and put in there right now if nothing else changes that is going to make a major difference. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be some difference, and that's sort of the argument of how much of a difference there could be. But it's not a great situation where you have a quarterback who's already trying to get himself back to a point. He's been there. We know what he is capable of, but even to put it nicely, he's slumping, he's struggling, struggling to figure it out. And when you have a quarterback that's trying to get out of a rut like that, when you're giving him such a small number of plays where he has chances to, where receivers are really open enough, then you're putting a lot of pressure on those throws to be perfect. And it's just putting a lot of pressure on him to be perfect, like you said, and that's hard for a quarterback in that position. Now, as far as the Jalen Hurts thing, um, yeah, I'm not optimistic that he is going to be significantly better. I'm not betting any money on that. At the same time, they said in the it was said in the broadcast, late in the broadcast yesterday, and I don't know how much is coming from this, but the idea that maybe there's some within the organization who just don't have a lot of confidence that Jalen Hurts is going to be a solution, is going to make that much of an impact, or is going to be, a big time guy for them. And I understand that. My thing is, this Eagles team is likely to have a pick in the top 10 in the draft right now. If there is any real sense within the organization that Hurts could be the guy, and I don't feel like we've seen, and I understand, I'm not saying I'm not here to stand up for Jalen Hurts, but I don't think we can make a ton of getting two opportunities, messing up one of those opportunities, because I understand you have to be ready, but also, you got to, I feel like it's obviously not a very big sample size, but I feel like if there's any chance, any feeling within the organization that he could be a long-term answer, then they need to figure that out now, because there's not going to be much of another opportunity to do that. Like, if it doesn't turn around with Carson Wentz, and they haven't, in the meantime, they haven't figured out if Jalen Hurts is the guy or not, then all of a sudden you're in a position where you need to do something in the draft, in the offseason. Something needs to change. So I feel like there's a part of me that really thinks that if there's a chance in their mind at all that he could be that guy, then this is the time to figure it out. There's no other. This is the best time to figure it out. And if you're not going to do it now, at what point do you draw the line? Like, because if you don't draw the line now, is it right? What happens for there's another game like? I mean, are you just saying, at this point, right? It can't really get. I don't want to say it can't get much worse, but right, like if you're not drawing the line here, then are you just not drawing the line at all for that happening this season? Or are you just saying, like, we're going to set the line at one more bad game or two more bad games, or whatever it might be?
Here's the problem with that, though. They're half a game out of the first place in the division.
Which is what makes it problematic. Yes.
I would feel differently about this discussion if there was a competent team in the NFC East that was a couple games over 500 and very clearly going to win the division, and the season was over. Then maybe I would entertain the idea of saying we just got to give Jalen Hurts a chance, because it's not fair to him to throw him out there for 2 plays and expect him to be good. I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't. You can't convince me right now he gives this team a better chance to win. And you got to play to make the playoffs. Because the other two teams that got in the playoffs at under 500 won a playoff game. And you're going to host a playoff game. And Carson Wentz can, if he gets hot, he's the kind of quarterback that can carry you deep into the playoffs. Now, we're very far from that happening. But that's the weird situation you're in. Is your point is absolutely valid. You got to figure out if Hurts is the guy, but you can't do that while also trying to make the playoffs. It's the downside of this division being so terrible is that you're right there. And they have 2 games against divisional opponents left. Everybody else has 1, if I remember correctly. Like,
I think that's right.
They might get 5 wins, and that might be enough. The other issue I had with Doug Peterson last night. Why did he challenge that fumble? He was never going to win that challenge. I cannot understand why a coach will ever challenge something that you can look at in a couple replays and say, yeah, he's not winning that. Originally, I thought it was closer, so I guess I'll kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm just a big advocate of timeouts. Mm-hmm. I don't like when teams waste. Same thing goes with Seattle with Russell Wilson not being able to get plays off fast enough in the first half, and they had to burn a couple timeouts. That is one of my little pet peeves that gets me irrationally angry when it comes to football and coaching and just being organized and disciplined as a team. You should never be having to burn timeouts like that. You should never be burning timeouts on challenges that you're never going to win. It was an all-around disaster. But I can sort of just keep sliding the bar on Carson Wentz and say, Okay, he is not playing well at all. Statistically, he's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. He missed throws last night. He underthrew a couple of the shots he did take. He's probably the worst deep ball thrower in the NFL right now, which is
Hmm.
a stark contrast from what he was when he was going to be the MVP before he tore his ACL. Because that was what he was doing, is he was lighting up teams deep. It's it's a very very different world we're living in. But how many quarterbacks? And I guess this is sort of ultimately my question. How many quarterbacks can you put into that position and say they are going to make that team better? Obviously, you got your Mahomes, your Rodgers, maybe
Right.
Lamar Jackson,
I was gonna
Russell
say like
Wilson,
yeah,
of
three or four or
course.
five guys. Yeah.
And the other part of this is that Carson Wentz is who Carson Wentz is in terms of the type of quarterback. He's going to hold on to the ball. He's going to want to make the play. He's going to want to compensate for the fact that he knows his offense is banged up. He's not particularly good at just kind of going with the flow and adjusting based on what's around him,
Hmm.
which is it's just comes with the territory. That's who he is. He's in the Brett Favre mold in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, I can't. I can't disagree. I certainly can't, disagree with your logic, and I can't even, wholeheartedly disagree with going with that thing. I feel like it would be a lot easier. I will say this, and I'm sure you're not going to disagree. It would be a lot easier to just keep sticking with Carson Wentz had we really seen any real positives from him. I understand that. I mean, you have to really, really, really want to see it to come up with essentially anything positive from him last
Oh,
night. Like if there
I've
was,
got one.
okay, well, go, hit me.
Well, a couple. He had a couple of nice scrambles that got the offense going when his
Mm,
receivers couldn't get open. But also, I thought his decision making was better. His execution was awful.
mm,
But to me, that interception was more of a misread than a bad decision. Right? All
mm,
interceptions are not created equal. Some of them are the quarterback making a bad decision. Some of them are you thought the guy was going one way, you threw it the other way, and
sure.
that's what that one looked like to me. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert, but the turnovers were mitigated, and he's been getting better about that. Of course, he still leads the league in interceptions, but it's been a little bit better. It's not these two turnover, two fumble games anymore. Yes, it's a small, really having to dig in there and find something positive. And from the Seahawks, real quick, we should probably
Mm.
acknowledge the team
That's
that
that's a good point.
won this game.
Won the game. Yeah.
Having a safety like Jamal Adams out there is a massive deal. That needs to be taken into consideration when you look at how bad this defense has been. The fact that he hasn't been there game in, game out for them because of the shoulder injury he's still battling. He creates a completely different dynamic, and as they pointed on the broadcast, that's a solution, a creative solution to your pass rush problem, because nobody could stay in front of him. He was getting home every time he blitzed, and he was all over the field doing what he does. He's an all pro caliber, if you want to call him a safety, whatever you want to. He's phenomenal. And he's one of those guys that you can put in so many different positions. He can cover people, he can play safety, and he can go inside the box, he can blitz. He's really good at everything. So that's part of this too, is if they can start getting this thing going defensively. Now, of course, they were helped by playing the Eagles, but they also get to play a lot of other NFC East teams coming up here. So that's part of this, is if they can just be a little bit better defensively and start building on this, I'm going to start feeling differently about them, because I like what I see offensively and I want to believe in this team. They just have not been able to comfortably beat anybody because that defense has been so bad all season.
Right. Yeah. And they do have the easiest remaining schedule in the NFL the rest of the way. So that's obviously a feather in their cap, or a positive for them. I see a strategy overall for the Seahawks right now that's pretty effective. I mean, the offense, it's simple, but it's effective. On offense, throw to DK Metcalf. Like, it's oversimplified, but like, it's that's kind of the case. And defensively, obviously, we know about the struggles that they have. Their strategy right now seems to kind of be beat up the opposing quarterback until he makes mistakes. And I understand that we don't want to take too much of that one game that we saw last night in terms of their full on strategy, but that's kind of seems to be their strategy right now. And all of a sudden, like you were just like you were talking about there, all of a sudden, I'm starting to see a lot of playmakers in that defense that all of a sudden could make this, one of the better pass rushing teams in the league. And if they can just, if some of these guys really are stepping up as playmakers, if they can apply pressure and just disrupt enough teams off, on the defensive end, disrupt the other opponent offensively, I think it's a situation where they could be really making some strides. And I think that there's this, I think they're really seem to be getting healthy at the right time. I think that their offensive approach or their offensive approach is looking pretty balanced. That's obviously encouraging. And if we continue to see these guys step up defensively for them, I am starting to get more and more optimistic about this team moving forward.
Yeah, and the NFC's. We'll get to this when we start talking about our NFL top 10 here in the next segment. But the NFC is kind of wide open. If they can find a way to start piecing some things together, and right, they've had a tough schedule so far. They're in a brutal division. If Adams can stay healthy, they can get some of these other Dunbar back in the secondary, get a little bit more coming from the pass rush. I'm not willing to give up on them quite yet. And of course, there's not too much to take away from beating a bad football team, but nevertheless, you gotta win the games that you're supposed to, and the Seahawks were able to do that. All right, we're going to take our first break here. When we come back, our NFL top 10. Chris and I every Tuesday are going to give you our top 10 teams in the NFL. You are watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.